What happens when country music's biggest star walks into the lion's den of daytime television and refuses to back down from one of its most outspoken hosts? Today, we're diving into the explosive confrontation that had America talking, where politeness went out the window and tensions reached a boiling point that nobody saw coming. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story has twists that will leave you speechless. The studio lights were blazing hot that Tuesday morning as Brooks settled into the guest chair on The View, his trademark cowboy hat resting comfortably on his head. He'd been booked to discuss his latest album and upcoming tour. What should have been a routine promotional appearance for one of country music's most beloved figures. The other hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, and Alyssa Farah Griffin, exchanged pleasantries about his recent achievements, the conversation flowing smoothly as expected. But Joy Behar had other plans. So Joy began, leaning forward with that familiar gleam in her eye that regular viewers knew meant trouble. Your music has always been about small-town values. But don't you think some of those traditional values are holding America back? The question hung in the air like smoke from a campfire. G's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his posture. Well, Joy, I think values like hard work, treating people with respect, and taking care of your family are pretty timeless. They've served folks well for generations. But surely you can see how some of these so-called traditional values have been used to exclude people, to keep certain groups from having equal rights, Joy pressed, her voice taking on that prosecutorial tone she was famous for. Whoopi tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. Maybe we should talk about your upcoming tour dates. But Garth held up a gentle hand. No, it's all right, Whoopi. Joy, I'm curious what you mean by that. In my experience, treating people with kindness and respect includes everyone. That's what I was taught growing up, and that's what I try to live by. Joy's laugh had an edge to it. Come on, G. You perform in states where they're passing laws targeting transgender kids, where they're banning books, where women's rights are being stripped away. Don't you feel any responsibility for the culture you're supporting? The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Sarah and Alyssa exchanged worried glances while Whoopi shifted uncomfortably in her chair. This was not the direction anyone had expected the interview to take. G's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Joy, I play music for people who love music. I don't check their voter registration cards at the door. My concerts bring together folks from all walks of life, all political beliefs, all backgrounds. Music has a way of reminding us what we have in common instead of what divides us. That's a nice sentiment, Joy shot back. But it's also a cop-out. When you perform in Texas, when you sell out arenas in Florida, you're putting money in the pockets of governments that are actively harming marginalized communities. How do you sleep at night knowing that? The audience was dead silent now. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath. This had gone from a promotional interview to a full-scale ideological battle in the span of minutes. G's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it now. Joy, I've been touring for over 30 years. I've played for soldiers overseas, for disaster victims, for families who saved up their hard-earned money to bring their kids to see a show. I've never once asked anyone about their politics, their religion, or who they vote for. Music is supposed to bring people together, not tear them apart. But silence is complicity, Joy fired back, her voice rising. When you refuse to take a stand against injustice, you're choosing the side of the oppressor. Your platform gives you influence. And with influence comes responsibility. And who decides what's just and what's unjust? G asked, his composure still intact, but his eyes flashing. You, the media, politicians in Washington? I trust the people at my concerts to make their own decisions about what's right and wrong. I'm not their moral compass. I'm their entertainer. Joy leaned back in her chair, clearly frustrated. So, you're saying you have no moral convictions whatsoever? That you'll perform anywhere for anyone, regardless of what they stand for? I'm saying I believe in the power of music to bring out the best in people, G replied evenly. I've seen it happen thousands of times, folks who might disagree on everything else, singing along to the same song, sharing that moment together. That's worth more than any political statement I could make. The other hosts were frantically trying to signal to the producers off camera. This interview was spiraling into territory that nobody wanted to navigate on live television. But Joy was just getting started. That's incredibly naive, she said, shaking her head. Music has always been political. Folk singers protested Vietnam. Punk rock fought against the establishment. Hip-hop gave voice to the marginalized. By pretending to be apolitical, you're actually making a very political statement. G's hands were clasped tightly in his lap now, the only visible sign of his growing tension. Joy, I respect those artists who choose to use their platform that way. But that's not my calling. My calling is to sing songs that help people get through their day, that remind them they're not alone, that celebrate the things that make life worth living. How convenient, Joy said with a bitter laugh. You get to sell millions of records without having to take any uncomfortable stands or risk alienating any fans. Must be nice to have that luxury while other people are fighting for their basic human rights. That last comment hit something deep in G. Brooks. For the first time since the interview began, his famous composure cracked, just slightly. Luxury, he repeated, his voice quieter but somehow more intense. Joy, you think what I do is some kind of luxury, isn't it? Joy shot back without hesitation. You get to stay above the fray while cashing checks from everyone. Meanwhile, real activists are putting their careers, their safety, their lives on the line for justice. G was quiet for a long moment, and the silence stretched uncomfortably across the studio. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. Let me tell you about luxury, Joy. Luxury is sitting in a New York television studio, making assumptions about people you've never met in places you've never been. The other hosts exchanged alarmed looks. Whoopi made another attempt to intervene. Maybe we should. But G continued, his gaze fixed on Joy. I've played for families in Oklahoma who lost everything in tornadoes. I've sung for coal miners in West Virginia who work dangerous jobs to feed their children. I've performed for single mothers working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. You want to talk about people fighting for their basic rights? These folks are fighting for their basic survival. And music gives them 2 hours to forget about their struggles and remember what joy feels like. Joy's expression hardened. That's exactly the problem, G. You're giving people an escape instead of encouraging them to fight for change. You're pacifying them with feel-good songs while their communities crumble around them. And what would you have me do instead? G asked, his voice rising for the first time. Tell a mother working double shifts that her problems are someone else's fault? Tell a veteran struggling with depression that he should be angrier at the world instead of finding reasons to keep going. I'd have you tell them the truth, Joy fired back. That their struggles aren't just bad luck or personal failings. That there are systems in place keeping them down, and those systems can be changed if enough people demand it. G leaned forward in his chair, his eyes blazing now. You think they don't know that already? You think working folks are stupid? They know exactly who's helping them and who's not. They don't need celebrities lecturing them about politics. They need hope. They need community. They need to be reminded that they matter. Hope without action is just false comfort, Joy countered. It's spiritual sedation. You're essentially a drug dealer peddling good feelings to keep people from demanding better lives. The accusation hung in the air like a slap. Sarah Haynes audibly gasped, and even Alyssa, usually quick with a diplomatic response, sat speechless. The camera operators were getting signals from the control room, but nobody knew how to stop this runaway train. G's voice was deadly quiet now. Did you just call me a drug dealer? Joy didn't back down. If the shoe fits, you profit off keeping people docile and content with their circumstances instead of inspiring them to fight for something better. That's enough. G's words cut through the studio like a blade. Joy, you just compared providing hope and joy to people to dealing drugs. You just insulted every single person who's ever found comfort in a song, who's ever felt less alone because of music, who's ever had their spirits lifted when they needed it most. I'm insulting a system that profits from complacency, Joy shot back. But for the first time, she seemed slightly less certain. No, you're insulting people, G said, standing up from his chair. The sudden movement created a ripple of tension through the entire studio. You're saying that a farmer in Kansas who works 16-hour days and finds peace in music is somehow being manipulated. You're saying that a teacher in Mississippi who plays my songs for her kids is being drugged into submission. You're saying that every person who's ever told me that a song helped them through a dark time is just too stupid to understand what's really good for them. Joy stood as well, her own anger flaring. I'm saying that you have a responsibility to use your influence for something more meaningful than just making people feel good about bad situations. And I'm saying that making people feel good about their lives, helping them find strength and joy and connection, is the most meaningful thing I can do, G replied, his voice carrying across the silent studio. You sit here in your comfortable chair judging millions of Americans you've never met, dismissing their values, their struggles, their choices, and you have the nerve to lecture me about responsibility. Whoopi finally found her voice. Okay, let's everybody just take a breath here. But Joy wasn't finished. Those people you're defending, gee, they vote for politicians who want to take away my rights, who want to control women's bodies, who want to deny health care to transgender kids. So, forgive me if I'm not impressed by your noble defense of their feelings. The words hit the studio like a bomb. G stopped moving, stopped breathing for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was so low that everyone had to strain to hear him. Joy, you just wrote off half the country as your enemies. You just decided that millions of Americans don't deserve empathy, don't deserve understanding, don't deserve to have their humanity recognized because of how you think they vote. And you're lecturing me about responsibility and justice. They made their choice, Joy said. But her voice lacked its earlier conviction. They're human beings, G replied simply. They're not your political enemies. They're not your ideological opponents. They're people with families, with hopes, with fears, with pain. And every time you write them off, every time you dismiss them, every time you treat them like obstacles to your vision of America, you make it harder for all of us to find common ground. The tension in the room was suffocating now. Camera operators were getting frantic signals from the control booth. But the confrontation had taken on a life of its own. This wasn't just about politics anymore. This was about two completely different visions of what America was, what it should be, and how change should happen. Joy's face flushed red as she processed G's words. Don't you dare turn this around on me. I'm fighting for people who are actually being oppressed, not coddling people who vote against their own interests. And there it is, G said, shaking his head slowly. You think you know what's best for everyone. You think people who disagree with you are just too ignorant to understand what's good for them. That's not fighting for people, Joy. That's talking down to them. I'm fighting for women who are dying because they can't get abortions, Joy shot back, her voice cracking with emotion. I'm fighting for kids who are being bullied and harassed for being different. I'm fighting for people who are losing their health care, their voting rights, their basic dignity. What are you fighting for? Gee, album sales. The insult landed like a physical blow. Gar's entire demeanor changed in that instant. The polite, diplomatic country star disappeared completely, replaced by something harder, more raw. What am I fighting for? He repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. I'm fighting for the idea that we're all Americans, Joy. That we all deserve respect regardless of where we live, what we do for work, or how we worship. I'm fighting for the belief that music, art, shared experiences can remind us of our common humanity instead of our differences. That's beautiful poetry, Joy said sarcastically. But it's meaningless when people are actually suffering. People are suffering everywhere, Joy, G replied, his voice gaining intensity. They're suffering in red states and blue states, in cities and small towns, in churches and synagogues and mosques. And instead of finding ways to help all of them, you've decided that some people's pain matters more than others based on their politics. That's not justice. That's tribalism. Whoopi made one final desperate attempt to regain control. We need to go to commercial. No, Joy said firmly, pointing at G. I want to hear him defend the people who are trying to take away my rights, who want to control my body, who think I'm less than human because I'm a woman with opinions. G stared at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was filled with a sadness that cut through all the anger. Joy, nobody thinks you're less than human, but you're doing exactly what you're accusing them of doing. You're dehumanizing people you disagree with. You're making them into monsters so you don't have to wrestle with the possibility that they might have legitimate concerns, legitimate fears, legitimate reasons for their beliefs. Their beliefs are destroying democracy, Joy fired back. And your attitude is destroying any chance we have of saving it, G replied quietly. You can't build a democracy by writing off half the population. You can't create unity by treating disagreement as evil. You can't fight for justice by denying other people's humanity. Joy laughed bitterly. So, what's your solution, G? We all just sing Kumbaya and pretend everything is fine while people lose their rights. My solution is that we start treating each other like human beings again, G said, his voice steady and clear. We listen to each other. We try to understand each other's fears and hopes. We look for common ground instead of reasons to hate each other. We remember that the person on the other side of the political divide is someone's parent, someone's child, someone's neighbor. That's naive garbage, Joy spat. You can't compromise with fascism. You can't find common ground with hate. The word fascism seemed to break something in G. His face went completely still, and when he spoke, his voice was ice cold. Did you just call half of America fascists, Joy? If they're supporting fascist policies and fascist politicians, then yes, that's exactly what I'm calling them. The studio fell into the deepest silence yet. Even the crew members stopped moving. G looked around the room, taking in the faces of the other hosts, the producers, the camera operators. Then he looked directly into the main camera. "Folks watching at home," he said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. "You just heard a television host call millions of Americans fascists because they don't share her political beliefs. You heard her dismiss your values, your concerns, your humanity. This is what passes for discourse in America today. This is why we can't have conversations anymore. This is why families don't talk politics at dinner. Why neighbors don't speak to each other. Why we're tearing ourselves apart." Joy tried to interrupt. "Gee, you can't just..." But he held up his hand and continued looking at the camera. "I came here to talk about music, to share some joy, to remind people that there's still beauty and hope in this world. Instead, I've been lectured, insulted, and told that the people who buy my music, who come to my concerts, who find comfort in my songs are fascists and drug addicts and enemies of democracy." He turned back to Joy, his expression filled with disappointment rather than anger. "Joy, I feel sorry for you. I really do. You're so consumed with your own righteousness that you can't see the damage you're doing. You're not fighting fascism. You're creating the very division that fascists feed on. How dare you?" Joy began. But G was already moving. He reached up, took off his cowboy hat, and placed it carefully on the table in front of him. The gesture was simple, but somehow it carried enormous weight. "I won't sit here and listen to you attack the people I love, the people I serve, the people who trust me with their hearts and their hopes. I won't give legitimacy to the idea that disagreeing with you makes someone evil." He looked around at the other hosts. "Whoopi, Sarah, Alyssa, I respect you all, and I'm sorry it came to this, but I can't stay here while someone uses your platform to spread hate and division." Joy's voice was shrill now. "I'm spreading hate? You're the one who refuses to condemn actual hatred and oppression." G picked up his hat and stood tall, his dignity intact despite everything that had happened. "Joy, the only hatred I've heard today came from this table. The only person I've seen trying to oppress others, trying to silence them, trying to delegitimize their existence is you." He walked toward the edge of the set, then stopped and turned back one final time. "To everyone watching, don't let anyone tell you that your beliefs, your values, your way of life makes you less American. Don't let anyone convince you that people who disagree with you are your enemies. We're all in this together, whether some folks want to admit it or not." With that, G. Brooks walked off the View set, leaving behind a stunned silence and a moment of television that would be replayed and debated for years to come. Joy sat frozen in her chair. The other hosts looked shell-shocked, and America had just witnessed something unprecedented. The country music superstar had drawn a line in the sand, refusing to participate in the very discourse that was tearing the nation apart. Whether you agreed with him or not, one thing was certain. Garth Brooks had just reminded everyone what it looked like to stand up for your principles, even when it cost you something. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Did Garth Brooks do the right thing by walking off, or should he have stayed and continued the debate? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal the real tensions shaping America today.